Alrighty, welcome back everybody to this newest episode of the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and I have not been this excited for an episode in a very, very long time. We have our first iteration of the 12-team playoff, and it is, I think, everything I wanted it to be and more from the beginning of the season. Games were important till the end. Conference championships mattered as they clearly decided, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I mean, look, there's just so much to unpack for this week. This week specifically. Some people think it's a lull. Like this week is a lull. All we got is the Army Navy game. All we got. Like it's not an amazing game every year. Who doesn't like to see a 9-10 victory? Um, but with that being said, there's a lot to talk about. First things first, though, if you like this kind of content, if you like college football, if you like all this stuff, go find me on Twitter at Zach_Sequel32. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on YouTube at the A to Z Poll Podcast. Uh, no spaces. And yeah, anywhere we really social media, I'm there. I posted my predictions on Twitter earlier today. So if you follow me on Twitter, you saw them. How I think the college football playoff is going to shake out. That went as follows. I have Tennessee beating Ohio State round one. I have Texas beating Clemson uh, also in round one. So this, sorry, round one. I got Penn State beating SMU, and I got Indiana beating Notre Dame. In round two, I have Oregon beating Tennessee. I have Texas beating Arizona State. I have Penn State beating Boise State, and I have Indiana losing to Georgia. Going into the third round, going into the semifinals, I have Oregon beating Texas and Georgia beating Penn State for a final one versus two matchup where I actually have Georgia prevailing over Oregon. Now, I'm going to break down my reasonings for the entirety of it. We're going to go through game by game how I think it's going to shake out. And along with that, we're going to talk about why Bama did not make it, if I think that's a good thing or bad thing. If you think it's a good thing or bad thing, you can always leave a comment down below. And then we're going to get into the Heisman race a little bit. I think I have an exciting little segment at the end for it. We're going to see how it goes. It could go disastrously, but we'll have to see. So first things first, I do want to talk about Bama not making it in over SMU. Now, Bama fans, you have to understand, you can't lose to two 6-6 teams and be a playoff team. I mean, you could, but you have to understand that there's a reason why you weren't in. That's not, in my opinion, the reason, though. Bama not being in there was a monetary decision. SMU benefited from the fact that the money was with them staying in the playoff. And let me explain why, right? Because on the surface, right, Bama's a bigger program. They got a lot of money. Not that SMU doesn't have a lot of money. Go watch the Pony Excess on ESPN. Great, great 30 for 30. But this is incentivizing conference championships, right? If SMU never takes that loss to Clemson, even if they never play it, right? Just say like Miami ends up being in there and SMU is just an 11-1 team. They're never even a question. They're in. That's it. So by putting that 13th data point out there, you think, okay, well, maybe that hurts them, but it shouldn't hurt them. And there's a lot of money tied up in these games, and they want to incentivize playing these games and keeping them around. So you just can't penalize teams for being in them. That's my 2 cents on it. Whether or not you think it's right or wrong, that's up to you. Um, but that is why SMU made it over Bama, despite good team, bad team, all that good stuff, or bad stuff, however you see it. All right, getting into it. Round one, I said first game, I have number 8 Ohio State versus number 9 Tennessee. I have Tennessee coming out of this. This is one of my hotter takes of the playoffs because preseason I had Ohio State being the undoubtedly best team in college football. Now I have them losing in the first round. How does that work out? Well, I'll tell you how it works out. As young as Nico Iamaleava is, and how how problematic or what's the word? How mistake prone he's been or has been at times. He's still been better than Will Howard. Will Howard did not shake out this year nearly how I thought he would. I really thought that Will Howard was going. We're going to see like like basically playoff or Big 12 championship Will Howard when he was at Kansas State playing TCU. That's the Will Howard I thought we were going to see this year. Instead, we saw Will Howard if he was doing his best Avery Johnson impression when Avery Johnson was playing bad, right? Like is he just didn't play that well this year. And Ohio State has been able to establish a run game, and somehow even with three of the best wide receivers in college football in Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Cornell Tate, they still somehow haven't been able to establish a pass game, and I think that comes down to both Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, and I said both, but also Will Howard. I don't like putting blame on players, but there has to be a point, especially with a such a veteran guy like Will Howard, that you just have to at some point the finger. Now, Ryan Day has a really bad track record against the SEC. He's only won two games. I think he's 2-11 against the SEC, and not to mention he has just simply not won games, not won big top five games. Right? He's not very good against top five opponents. He's not very good against the SEC, and he's just not very good in these big moments, as we've seen. I mean, even last week, obviously the against Michigan, like he losing against Michigan is a huge deal, right? That's the game you don't want to lose, and he's about to be facing a better defense. I am still under the impression, I'm still like it's that big of a debate. Certainly is, but it's not crazy that Tennessee is the best defense in college football. I know technically by a yard standard it is actually Ohio State, but I think that Tennessee is pound for pound the best defense in college football. I will be using analytics here, but sometimes I will just go off vibes. And this is one of those situations where I think that Nico makes less mistakes than Will Howard. I think that the defense is able to, that Tennessee's defense will be able to force more turnovers. And I think that Josh Heupel is going to be much more motivated to take risks, take, you know, potentially mess up here or there, risks that Ohio State has shown just 2 weeks ago that they are not willing to make or even attempt to make. He's in a different position. Tennessee's in a different position than Ohio State, but I do think that Tennessee comes out of this one on top. Next game, number 12 Clemson versus number 5 Texas. This game I think is going to be closer than people realize. Clemson has had one of the top offenses in the entire college football landscape, and up into they're 12th right now. I had to look it up today. They're 12th right now, but they've been as high as third in the country um at points in this season, and I think that comes down to uh you know when it clicks, and like Dabo has a system and it works for Dabo. That being said, I do have Texas eking this out. I think Texas just ends up being bigger, faster, stronger, and Steve Sarkisian is not going to come out there, choking and hopefully, choking and coming out of this, not prepared. I think this is has to be the most prepared game you come for. They're coming off of a big loss that would have given them a bye week. They're in Austin. They got to be fired up, right? If they're not fired up for this Clemson team, then I don't know what the deal is, because they're a Clemson team that barely beat SMU, which we'll talk about them in a minute. But I think that Texas should handle Clemson. But I do think it will be closer, and I think it'll be more of a shootout. I think the thing that will break is the defenses first, and I think Clemson's defense will break before uh Texas's defense breaks. And I think that's where it's going to come down. I think Texas will just simply outscore them. I'm not saying shootout, but I do think Texas wins. I think it's a rather high scoring game. Next you got Penn State versus SMU. Penn State, I think, comfortably wins this game. I think SMU is still a couple years away. Get the big wallets, get everything you need, get from Dallas. They will be a contending team in the next 5 years. I've said this a couple weeks in a row now, but Kevin Jennings is a fine quarterback. He just hasn't had to face somebody like Abdul Carter, right? They're going to. I just don't see this SMU offense being able to do anything, especially, we just watched them really struggle against Clemson. And I think that Penn State is a better team than Clemson. I think a lot of these teams are better teams than Clemson. And I don't think that SMU has actually played anybody really impressive this year. So I just don't see a universe where SMU bests Penn State. Next, to end the first round, number 7 Notre Dame hosts number 10 Indiana. What a great game. This is probably my favorite game of the playoffs. This or the Tennessee Ohio State. The Tennessee Ohio State game is going to give us a real good gauge on where these two conferences stack up against each other, but I think they're going to be relatively even. That being said, Notre Dame versus Indiana. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Kurt Signetti said that. He was all up in arms that it's not an Indiana home game because Indiana lost to Ohio State. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. That being said, and that it's always going to come back to that. Literally always is going to come back to that. It's a really, really bad loss, far and away the worst loss of anyone in this playoffs. Anyone probably in the top 25. And now they have to, and now they're somehow in the playoffs. Again, not totally on board with that, but it's happened. We'll let it slide. I'm not going to complain. Indiana, I believe, is going to prevail in this matchup. Um, I think it comes down to a couple things. Well, one, Notre Dame's not a pushover team, but Indiana has a really good defense, and Notre Dame's offense just isn't that great, right? They need to get their run game going, and Indiana's been pretty solid against the run game. Again, the only time that they've really struggled this year was against Ohio State, and their offense has been able to dump points when it needs to. Notre Dame versus Indiana is going to be a really big fight, but I also don't even think that Notre Dame's going to have that aggressive a home field advantage. Bloomington's not that far away, right? They're going to probably travel there pretty well. I think this is going to be a very good game. I think Indiana will end up on top, though. Round two. Round two. Oregon versus Tennessee. There is a reason why Oregon is the number one ranked team in the country. They have already beaten Ohio State. They have beaten every single opponent that has come their way this year. They're the first team in maybe ever to beat Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in a season. They're the Big Ten champs in their first season there. And I think that Oregon handles Tennessee pretty well. I think that Dan Lanning is a creative enough coach and a motivative enough coach that he is going to get his guys ready. They're never going to get pushed over. But this Oregon team is somehow gotten hotter and hotter as the year goes on. And I just don't see Tennessee being able to stop it. We saw, again, technically the number one rated defense get absolutely carved up by Dylan Gabriel. And he has just proven that he can do things in a myriad of different ways. I think Oregon proves too much for Tennessee to handle, but I think Tennessee, in the future will be back. And, we're gonna see a lot of good play from them in the future. Next, you got Texas versus Arizona State. This is a tougher game to evaluate. A lot of people are like, "Oh, Texas, they're just gonna steamroll them, right? They're Texas. What are we doing?" But I don't know if that's true. Who has Texas beat? Oh wait, right? They've beaten Texas A&M. They've beaten Oklahoma. Um, Lost now twice to Georgia. Barely beat Vanderbilt. Who else did they almost lost to or lost to? Doesn't matter. The point being, Texas has not been phenomenal against the run. Arizona State is amazing with the run, and you have Cam Skattebo, the self-proclaimed best running back in the country. Now, I think we all know it's probably Ashton Jeanty. We can have that discussion later if we want. But Texas has aggressively underperformed against ranked opponents, and I think that we're going to see Texas underperform against Arizona State, but I do still think that Texas will come out on top against Arizona State. Um, it would not surprise me if Texas lost to Arizona State, but as far as these games go, I just think that Texas's defense is going to be way too much for Arizona State to handle. And if the offense can at all get going, then it's going to be game over for the Sun Devils. Um, the next one. We have number 6 Penn State versus number 3 Boise State. There's a matchup that a lot of people really, really, I think, want to romanticize for Boise State. I think that Penn State's going to win comfortably. I think that Ashton Jeanty still rushes for over 100 yards. I don't see that not happening. But I think Penn State wins comfortably. I don't see Maddox Medicine and Camp Camper being able to connect against that secondary, right? I think that Boise State's going to have a good offensive line and that Ashton Jeanty's going to run pretty well. I just don't. we've done a lot of discussing, right? A lot of discussing about, oh, well, SMU has a weak strength of schedule, and this team has a weak strength of schedule, and blah, 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 blah. Boise State is far and away the weakest strength of schedule from anybody in the playoffs, because they're in the Mountain West. They're the third seed, right? I just don't, I didn't really understand why they were there before. I think I said this last week. I understand they only lost one game and it was to Oregon and it was on the road and all this stuff, but it wasn't the real Oregon team. And I think Oregon would beat them much more handily now. This was also still Ashton Genty's coming out party. And I think that it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting. And I think Boise State punches them in the mouth early, but I do think that Penn State will end up winning by multiple scores. I just don't see it being particularly close. Next, another game I don't really see being particularly close, but that's going to be number 10 Indiana versus number 2 Georgia. I just think that Georgia is going to be way too much for Indiana to handle. I think Kurt Cignetti, making the playoffs, potentially winning a game there, will be able to recruit very well in the future, especially, being in the Big Ten, being in one of those favored conferences. I think that Indiana will be a powerhouse of a team in just a couple years. I think we're going to see teams like Indiana, Tennessee, and SMU that just, really bloom and become those like, new age blue chip teams very soon. What I don't really see happening though is them beating Georgia. Even if Georgia has to start Gunnar Stockton if, Carson Beck isn't ready. It's not like Carson Beck's been playing that well. And Gunnar Stockton made a couple huge plays for them in the conference championship game. I think that Georgia handles Indiana pretty well by a couple scores. I don't think it's going to be as bad as against TCU, but I don't think it's going to be particularly close. Next, uh, Oregon versus Texas. So now we're in the semifinals, round three. Uh, I think this is when, the rails fall off for Texas. We saw them fall off against Georgia, and I think that, I think this is where Texas's journey ends. I think Oregon beats Texas. I think that this is, it's going to just be too big of a team for them. I think that Texas is, they're going to be, yeah, they're going to come out, they're going to try a bunch of stuff, but if they continue to make those same mental errors, Dylan Gabriel has shown that he can win in every way imaginable, and I think that he does right here. Number 6 Penn State versus number 2 Georgia. I think, like I said a minute ago, I think even with Gunnar Stockton, they're still one of the best teams, if not the best team in this tournament. Um, I think that Penn State under Andy Kotelnicki is great when you're not against one of the if not the best team in the country. Take as many shots downfield if you as you want. I don't see that working out as well as it will against SMU and Boise State. I think that Georgia is just bigger, faster, stronger than anybody Penn State has had to face so far. And everyone was saying like, oh, Penn State got a really lucky slot here, right? They got an SMU and they got a Boise State, right? They have in theory one of the easier paths to here, but that will also be their downfall as this will be outside of Ohio State this year. They're honestly, including Ohio State, this will be far and away their toughest matchup of the year. And I don't see them. I don't think James Franklin is built for this. Finally, the national championship, Oregon versus Georgia. I know this is not super sexy. It's not the Boise State versus Tennessee or the Penn State versus Clemson that everyone wanted to predict. But I think Oregon versus Georgia is where it's going to come down to. And I think that Georgia's going to win. I would love if we had a new national champion. I would love to be like, oh, Oregon's going to go in there and steamroll them. But I've seen Oregon play. I've seen them, their struggles, their good things, their bad things. I've just talked about how they can win in a myriad of ways, and they haven't lost all season. But Georgia has had the toughest path here of anybody, far and away. They had to play Alabama. They had to play Ole Miss. They are now having to face uh Penn State and I guess Indiana isn't that crazy, but and they had to play Texas twice, right? And they won. I think that Georgia is far and away the most battle tested team. I think that they have the most resilience, and again, even with Gunnar Stockton, I think that Georgia is going to win this game. I think Georgia's defense is going to be the best one that Oregon has seen all year, and I just don't know a way that I think Oregon can win this game. Now, I could be wrong. Everything I just said, none of it could happen. In fact, the exact opposite could happen if you know, as it goes. But based off what I've seen this year, based off of my thoughts as unbiased as I possibly can, not that I really have any inherent bias towards any of these teams, I think that this is how it's going to shake out. Now, a disclaimer. I do want a disclaimer. I think this shakes out pretty similarly if Alabama's in it. Looking back, if Alabama versus Penn State, we know what happens, in my opinion, if Penn State wins. But if Alabama wins, I don't see them. I would see them beating Boise State. I don't see them beating Georgia. I know they beat them already this year, but Georgia is better now than they were. And I just think that at this point, we're not seeing uh I think it shakes out pretty much exactly the same whether or not you have Bama or SMU in there. All right, that is my prediction for how I think this is all going to shake out. Leave a comment, leave your predictions in the comments, at least for the first round, right? Who do you think's going to win? Uh, it's 2 weeks away. This week we got the Army Navy games. That should be exciting. Um, but let me know what you think. Now our last segment. This is we have our four Heisman winners announced, or winners, sorry, candidates announced, our finalists. That being Boise State's Ashton Jeanty, Colorado's Travis Hunter, Miami's Cam Ward, and Oregon's Dylan Gabriel. I, as a fun little exercise, am going to sit here and make a case for each one to win the Heisman and see if I can't convince you of any of them, right? See how we feel after listening to the best case scenario for all of them. And we're going to start with everyone's favorite angel, Ashton Jeanty. What can you say about this guy? I mean, he's number one in pretty much every single rushing stat that matters. I think he's third in attempts. I'm sorry, third in yards per carry. But other than that, like he said it himself, defenses moved, made their whole scheme around stopping him, and they couldn't. That was it. They just couldn't stop him. It's pretty insane, but this guy is like 130 yards away from breaking Barry Sanders' record. People are like, oh, he did it in more games. He sat out 8 quarters. That 8 quarters minus 13 games, that's 11 games. That's the same amount of time. He has done something that, we have not seen since the 80s and well past any other Heisman winning running back. And you're going to say that he's not the Heisman winner. I don't see how you can sit here and make an argument for anyone else based off of just watching him play, right? I saw a highlight reel the other day of each one of the uh finalists highlights, and Ashton Jeanty has like 15 of the same play where he breaks 15 tackles and then runs to the end zone. This kid is incredible. He's a game breaker, he's a game changer, and he should be my Heisman winner. All right, next, Travis Hunter. When was the last time we saw somebody play this much? Right? I know. We saw the Oregon Duck on the Pat McAfee show. Snaps aren't a stat, but the best ability is availability, right? And who's been more available than Travis Hunter? And available on both sides of the ball. I mean, what player do you know that's not a quarterback that has their own touchdown to interception ratio and it's like 9-4, right? For a quarterback, that would be pretty solid. For a skill player, that's ridiculous. We're talking about who has impact on their team. Most players, every other player included, makes up, less than 10% of their one side of the ball. Ashton Jeanty, Travis Hunter makes up nearly 20% of both sides of the ball, right? He's 2 of 22. He's 18% of the total production on the field. And people are like, oh, well, his defensive stats aren't there. They don't throw at him. When they do, he picks it off. They don't throw at him. And we've seen all the highlights, right? Week 1, who cares if it was against North Dakota State? That's a very good team. That's a team that competed in the FCS this year. He made that catch over. He made catches left, right, and sideways, right? Snaps might be a stat, but availability is. And if you're talking about somebody who has made a huge impact on their team on both sides of the ball, look no further than Travis Hunter. All right, that's my case for Genty and Hunter. Moving on to Cam Ward. The number one offense in college football this year was the Miami Hurricanes. I know they couldn't finish it all the way, but you can't tell me that was any fault of Cam Ward, right? He did everything. I mean, even out there, he looks effortless, right? There's nothing you can do to stop him because no team could stop him. Whenever they beat him, it was because the defense. They had Mario Cristobal put together a build a defense this year, and although it was made out of some talented players, we've seen even we've seen it in Alabama. We've seen it in a lot of schools where it just didn't work out. And Cam Ward still was able to will his team to 10 wins this season and nearly got himself into the playoffs. He's going to be the number one quarterback off the board next year. And if we're talking about just best player, I mean, how can the best player on the number one offense, the quarterback not be, you know, the Heisman? I mean, look at it this way. I made the claim just a minute ago that Travis Hunter, was almost 20% of the total production. Which 10% on the offense or defense means the most besides the quarterback, right? The person who touched the ball on every play, the person doing the thing. Every single thing that happened in that offense was Cam Ward's doing. Even the rushing plays, you still got to watch out for that guy's legs. It's been, it's been crazy watching him just absolutely carve up everybody. If you're looking for a Heisman winner, Cam Ward's your guy. And finally, Dylan Gabriel. This guy came out here and defied expectations. I mean, there's always that old adage, quarterback on the best team, right? But it's not just the quarterback on the best team. He's the best quarterback on the best team, right? He's the best quarterback in college football on the best team. This guy is one forwards, backwards, and sideways. You wanna talk about versatility. He came into this season and his scouting report was, he makes the short throws. He's not fitting it in windows. He doesn't have a big arm. And, he can get out of the pocket, but he's not very mobile. And what did we see him do this year? We saw him do all of that and more. Go watch the Ohio State game. Go watch the Washington game. Go watch every game that he has played and tell me he's not fitting it into windows. He doesn't have a beautiful deep ball and he can't, scramble and make something happen with his legs. Dylan Gabriel has been undoubtedly the best quarterback this year and the most versatile, level-headed and experienced quarterback, right? This is a guy who has far and away the most experience in college football. With this next game he plays, he's going to pass Bo Nix for most total games played. That was just set last year. Dylan Gabriel has been adaptive, maneuverable, and what is not the Heisman, but for the best player, right? The best overall team player. Travis Hunter gets two sides of the ball, but Dylan Gabriel's playing it all. I mean, not too much more you can say. And again, he's the only candidate you can say hasn't lost. All right, that was my case for every Heisman winner or every Heisman finalist. We'll see how it turned out. I'll listen to it back later, but leave me in the comments who you think will be the Heisman winner. Uh, it gets announced, I believe, this Saturday, the 14th. All right, that's going to about do it for the A to Z poll podcast. If you haven't already, go check out my graphic on Twitter. Everything else, go like, subscribe, follow, do whatever, everything. Find me on all the social media. Leave a comment. That being said, Army Navy games this weekend, so I hope you get to go watch some football. And I guess I hope your team wins if you're either Army or Navy. Bye bye.